Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar from Cycling Scotland on bikeability. This follows on from the webinar we had last month, which was looking at disrupted delivery as a response to COVID and the measures we'd recommend putting in place. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this morning. I think we probably still have a few people joining on, so I'll just kind of pace it till we've got as many as possible before we get to the content. Obviously, I think right now we're in a very challenging time, and this week's announcement for many of us gives us even more uncertainty. However, despite that, I'd like to offer a huge thank you to everyone across the Bikeability Scotland network for all the amazing work that's been going on. It's amazing. I mean, my local children's primary school, there's been on-road delivery as recently as this week. And you can just see how much everyone's getting out of it. So for everyone who's been able to ensure that worked around the various risk assessments and mitigation to ensure that we can continue to offer for life skills through bikeability, that's so much appreciated. And I really hope we're winning friends and influencing more with the school communities as well. In terms of some housekeeping this morning, unfortunately we are in a virtual setup. So I'm unable to offer you good things like biscuits, teas and coffees, but hopefully you are sitting comfortably. We're going to try and stick to time as much as possible because we want to get to the question and answer session and see what we can give some time to now. And today I would ask you all, if you do have questions throughout the presentations, if you can type them into the question box, and we'll respond to them at the end. And there should be a function to actually do the upvoting questions, so as you think they're more relevant. I should say in terms of introductions, my name's Christopher Johnson and I'm the Head of Education in Scotland Head of Education and Training with Cycling Scotland. And I'm joined by some of my colleagues today. So Andrew Abbas, one of our core tutors from Sterling Cycle Training, will be taking us through the new outcomes from the resources. Josh Wood, who's our Cycle Training Officer, will be talking about some of the expanded scope the new resources will provide looking at rural delivery. And Nina Saunders, our Cycle Training Manager, who you'll also know from Quality Assurance, will be speaking through the various bits of instructor orientation and training we'll be offering. The session is going to be recorded today as well, so if there's any bits you need to leave halfway through or you want to watch again, that will be available afterwards on the Bikeability Scotland site. And the main purpose of today's session is really to look at the resources which have now been signed off. And I think it'd be fair to say these are the most significant changes in resources since we picked up the programme in 2010. And after a lengthy and extended consultation process, in part due to the disruption with schools closures, these have now been signed off by the Bikeability Scotland delivery group. And our intention is that they'll be phased in from the 1st of January. So hopefully this morning we've all got a chance to see the resources. You should hopefully have also seen some links during the consultation process, and David's going to make available a link to the slides just so you can look at them as we go through. So in terms of the topics this morning, I'll give you a quick update on why change has been needed. We'll look at the familiar outcomes and new outcomes of Andrew, expanding the scope, and instructor orientation. But as I say, the most important bit we want to get to is questions and answers. So in terms of why was change needed, and I do apologise that my video is not up right now, but it's vanished from my screen, but if David can make it happen, brilliant. There was two reasons why we've had to make such changes to the Bikeability Scotland resources. Part one of that is that we have a commitment to align to the national standard for cycle training. This was reviewed in 2018, following a kind of consultation process in 2017. Oh, great, there we go. Thanks, David. And that led to the actual national standards of the training that we base bikeability on being fully updated. Some of the reasons they wanted to do that was actually to try and promote greater inclusion. I mean, if you look at the way the outcomes are written in the current resources, I think it does exclude a large number of participants from actually meeting those outcomes. So that was one intention. The other bit as well, though, is to recognise that cycle training has to be able to respond to a dynamic training environment. So there's a lot more coming out in terms of decision making. The second reason, though, we wanted to change was not just in response to the fact we had to update our resources to line with the national standard, but also for a number of years now we've been running our quality assurance strategy. And if any of you have been fortunate enough to participate in that programme, I do understand it is fairly nerve-wracking, but it's been so helpful to us. What we learn is, maybe there's a couple pointers for the individual instructor and what could be improved. But actually, most of the feedback we get is about what Cycling Scotland need to do to ensure that everyone across Scotland who's involved in delivery has access to the right tools and information to make the sessions as useful as possible. And that's fed back hugely. I mean, you'll have seen some updates we've had to make to our instructor training programs, even other modules we've added as CPDs. And there was a few things coming out from what we've been seeing, particularly in terms of looking at training environments as well, that we wanted our resources to better support what people are delivering on the ground. So those are the two justifications as to why we're changing. And the main message I would take away from it is we want to make the training sessions to ensure that we're actually supporting children to develop and take away the skills they need to be able to cycle confidently. And that means we wanted less routine, but also more of decision making that allows riders to operate in a dynamic environment. And you can actually see this sits with the 4 capacities of the curriculum for excellence as well, in terms of what we want to do is boost children's confidence. So as they move away from the sort of fairly risk-assured, risk-assessed training environment that they would be doing their level 2 training in, and they make a sort of journey home, that as the situation and road environment changes, they can respond to it effectively. We also recognise that within the sort of sustainable travel hierarchy, there's a responsibility to other road users as well. And that's particularly for vulnerable pedestrians or people riding horses and so on. So we wanted to ensure that actually everyone's got a better, clearer understanding of their own responsibilities and contributors that way. And to do that, the main kind of shift, when I'm afraid we're going to repeat this several times this morning, has been the development of less looking at a sequence for each manoeuvre where there's a standard process in the old resources involving effectively you've got your first look, you've got your signal, what would have been a lifesaver moving forward. I mean, all of these are still part of the bikeability training, but what we want to do is look at actually is the core functions, which is what a rider will develop as they go through training. And although we're putting a lot more focus onto the core functions, these are all things that should be familiar to us. I mean, the national standards refers to 4 functions, but really we see 5 as cycle control, all the skills that we develop during level 1 training, underpins and is the foundation of everything we're going to develop as we move on to level 2. And those include making good and frequent observation, choosing and maintaining a suitable riding position, understanding priorities and decision making, and communicating and signalling our intentions to others. And in the old resources we have used the mnemonic COPS for a lengthy time, and basically with the new core functions we're adding an additional P to that. So you'll see, however forced it is, to try and help us remember what the functions are, we're looking at control, observation, positioning, priority, and we put signal and communicate under the S. And core functions is very much what we're going to be teaching throughout the Bikeability programme. That starts to develop those in level 1, but very much comes out in level 2. And across all of the activities that we'll run in a level 2, most of which will be familiar to you, the main focus is we're going to be looking at is how are children developing those core functions. The other thing that the national standard has been updated to teach something called systematic routines, and I've put them on the slide quickly here so you can see them. And there's a fair amount of repetition in some ways with the core functions. But the systematic routines isn't something we're necessarily going to teach. A systematic routine is something that we will expect to see riders start to demonstrate as they develop the confidence and experience to ride through the core functions. So I guess the main thing, as long as we're teaching the core functions, the feedback we should be getting from riders to know that they've taken it in is we will see them actually start to apply a routine to their riding as they go through the various sessions of Bikeability. And so I'm kind of opening with why we've made changes, and what we certainly are is, you know, the look and feel of the resources is going to be different. Some of the content in terms of what we're looking for in terms of outcomes is going to be different. But actually the training that you will be involved in delivering going forward is going to look very similar to what we do just now. And to help kind of talk us through that, I've invited Andrew Abbas, one of our lead tutors, who also is involved in a huge amount of delivery through Sterling Cycle Training, just to talk us through what that looks like. So Andrew, I'll pass across to you, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And if we could have the first slide, please, which Chris has already teased you with. So, as I said, the new core functions will be familiar to any instructor who is already using the acronym COPS, COPS, standing for Control, Observation, Positioning and Signalling, while observing riders and deciding what feedback to give. And COPS is in the current Cycle Trainer Manual and current Bikeability Level 2 instructor prompt cards. So in addition to control, which at Level 2 is normally a matter of making sure they're in appropriate gear, the new 4 core functions are observation, it must be appropriate, good and frequent. So that's looking for hazards, checking the space you're going to move into is clear. Positioning has to be appropriate, and that's simply, are they in primary, are they in secondary, are they out of the door zone? And then decisions need to be made about priority, that's the new P, and that is as simple as, do I wait or do I go? Now this is new to COPS. It's the extra P that's gone from COPS to COPPS, but it's not new to Bikeability. Riders have always had to make decisions about priority. And then signalling or communication. Is it appropriate? And that could be as simple as calling out a friendly warning to a pedestrian when using shared space. So the reminder is there on page 11 of the new Level 2 instructor notes, COPPS, COPS, control, observe, position, priority, and signal or communicate, bearing in mind that signalling is all forms of communication, not just the traditional arm signal. Next slide, please. And it's important to note that the core functions do not necessarily take place in that order. As Chris mentioned, they are concurrent activities. So bearing that in mind, let's look at this slide from the Highway Code, it's Rule 163, and let's just think about COPS, COPPS for a moment. Particularly, think about observation, and I'll give you a moment just to let that slide sink in. So we're perhaps very familiar with training riders to observe at junctions. Look before signalling, check traffic before joining a main road, look before changing position, making sure the space you're going to move into is clear. We're calling that a final look, it used to be called a lifesaver. But let's think we're saying that observation needs to be good and frequent. So this is involving looking for hazards a lot of the time. Now if we look at this slide, here we can assume that the rider's been looking up ahead, has seen that there's no parked cars on the opposite side of the road, and decided therefore there's room for them to be safely overtaken, and has correctly chosen a secondary position. So they are looking up the road for hazards, but then upon becoming aware of a vehicle coming up behind, they also need to look behind towards that hazard and check that the driver has moved over the centre line, as per the Highway Code, is using the other side of the road to overtake, and if not, be ready to pull in out of the way using that meter space that the secondary position provides. So looking behind at every vehicle coming up behind you to pass, we're definitely talking about frequent observation here. Go to the next slide, please. So this is a 20-mile-an-hour residential street outside a primary school. So again, thinking in terms of COPPS, COPS, let's focus on observation first. We need, as I said, to be training riders to look as far up the road as they can, looking for hazards. So, can everybody see the hazard, the major hazard that's up ahead? I'll give you a moment to study. So there, hopefully, you can see that between those two vehicles, there's a yellow traffic island making a pinch point. So we need to train our riders to be looking as far up the road as possible to see these hazards. And then once they've seen that, the next observation is going to be behind, looking at the traffic that might be coming up behind them. Is there anybody moving into the space that, as a rider, I want to be in? Is there somebody signaling they're going to overtake and pull in? Is there anybody behind that I need to communicate to that I'm going to move into primary? Quite often, in terms of communication, it's making that eye contact. It's you know, looking at them, and sometimes that's enough to modify driver behaviour. But perhaps if you're working in a level 3 environment, you might want to go back to Franklin and say, if somebody is overtaking at this point, traditional arm signal might be enough to get them to back off. Then once you're past the hazard, the next observation is if you're ready to move back into secondary, if that's appropriate, again, to check the space you're going to move into, your final look, or lifesaver as we once would have called it. So that's the observation. The next P is the positioning. Again, very straightforward here. There's a road narrowing, so your riders, they need to be in primary. And if for any reason they've not been able to get into primary, they need to plan where they're going to pull in and stop. Next, decisions about priority, the next P. Well, you are the vehicle in front, you have priority. So the decision there really is, well, if I'm not able to move out into priority, where am I going to pull in and stop? And then we're on to communicate, signal, the S, if anybody else will benefit. And I briefly mentioned that already. So that's using COPPS to go through those core functions. Let's watch next some of the Bikeability Scotland and Bikeability Trust videos to look at the core functions, bearing in mind that some of the embedded on-screen text is using the old language lifesaver rather than new language final look. And what we'll do is we'll run through this first video possibly 5 times to look at each element of COPS individually, because it's important to note that COPS is not a sequential thing but concurrent activity. So the first time we'll just run the video, I won't say anything, we'll just get used to it. You can decide if the rider's in control. So there we are, we've looked at her in control. Next, in terms of observation, well, she's looked behind. Now the rider's coming up to the main road, there's a giveaway, so she needs to give way if there's traffic coming. She's checked both ways, it was clear, so then she did a final check to make sure there was nobody coming up on her inside. So that's all familiar. And once more, and we'll look at positioning. So here the rider's in primary position. And remains in primary all the way through the manoeuvre, exactly as currently. And we'll watch it again, we'll think about priorities. So it is a give way. If there's traffic coming, the rider has to wait. The rider checks it's clear there is nobody coming, so carries on. Had it been a stop line, obviously they would have needed to stop. But with the give way, they have to check. And then finally, we'll look at signalling, communication. Now in this situation, the rider is signalling. The new bikeability guidance will be, if there is nobody to see the signal, and that also includes pedestrians, they need to know what you're doing, but if there's no driver or no pedestrian to see the signal, then there is no requirement to signal. The highway code says you should signal, not you must signal, and this is enabling the rider to keep their hands on the bars for control and to use the brakes. If this were a steeper hill, it may well be that it's more important they're on the brakes and able to slow down and stop at the junction than to do a signal. So it's the same principle as we're currently using for the U-turns. If there's nobody there to see the signal, no requirement to do it. Now the next video is from the Bikeability Trust and shows an adult rider accompanying a younger rider through right turns and passing parked cars. We'll watch this a couple of times. First of all, silent, just so you can get used to the video. and then we'll focus the decisions that the riders make about priorities. Okay, so if we run through that again, and we'll focus on the decisions they're making with regard to priorities. So here they're coming to a crossroads, they want to turn, they have to wait for oncoming traffic. There is no oncoming traffic, so they are able to carry on without waiting. Here they're passing a parked car, they need to borrow the other side of the road to keep out of the door zone. Again, if there's oncoming traffic, they have to wait. There was no oncoming traffic, so they were able to go. No need to wait in that situation. Had there been oncoming traffic, then they would need to have waited. So decisions about priority, as I say, it's as simple as, do I wait or do I go? We'll look at the next video. This one is somebody going straight on at a mini roundabout, and this time we'll focus on signalling and communication. Again, first time we'll just run it through without my commentary, and then we'll have a talk about signalling and communication that's taking place. Okay, so if we run that through again. So the rider's approaching the roundabout, they're going straight on, there isn't a signal for I am going straight on, so there's no signal. They're then stopping and making eyeball contact with any drivers coming from their right. That's part of communication, making eyeball contact. And then once they've established it's clear they can come on the roundabout, they're then eyeballing on the left. And again, communicating to any drivers who might be on their left, I'm on this roundabout, I'm coming past in front of you. And by the positioning of their bike, I am going straight on. So that's communication for going straight on at a mini roundabout. If we just recap finally, a useful way to remember the 4 core functions is COPS, C-O-P-P-S, C for control, O for observation, P for positioning, P for priority or decisions about priority, and S for signalling or communications. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Andrew. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a quick kind of run through there, but you'll probably recognise Andrew's voice from the narrator of our existing Bikeability videos. So I think it's been really helpful to see Andrew look at how we kind of laid out the text and the cues previously to how we would do it looking at the new resources. And I'd say the activity should be familiar. I understand we've included a roundabout there, and there may not be one close to the setting where you deliver the bikeability. But in terms of the theory, you can see through the left to right turns, passing a parked car, all of these core functions, they are, I mean, it's reinforced in what you're doing already. So it's very much what we hope is by teasing out through the COPS and that handy mnemonic is getting riders to understand not just how they're applying the training at the junction you're using right there and then, but that wider understanding to support them to continue cycling on other trips. Obviously, Andrew's with us throughout this webinar as well. I don't know if you've got the question prompts as well, you want to start putting ideas up, please do feel free, because say there should also be the option to like or kind of highlight questions that you would like answered as well from other people. Now I'd like to move on. I'll invite Josh Wood onto our screen, if that's okay. And Josh is just going to talk us through delivery in a rural setting, which he has extensive experience of in his current location of Dumfries and Galloway. So over to you, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, I'm actually based down in Dumfries and Galloway, where we have a really large geographical area, some reasonably decent-sized rural towns, but actually a lot of our primary school setting is very rural, where the obvious bikeability style training junction is not always easy to get to, or even there at all. However, that is not to say there are not still some really excellent opportunities to deliver bikeability to the national standard. If you have a look here at the slide, we can show how riding within a rural setting does still align to the national standard roles 3 and 4 there. So maintaining a suitable riding position, that doesn't necessarily just have to apply to your approach to a junction. That could apply to riding on a more rural road, perhaps a single track road, or within that setting of dealing with different traffic that you have to encounter within a rural setting, perhaps slightly faster moving, where your road position is going to be all the more important. The negotiating of junctions, classically, that is the difficult thing with bikeability in a rural setting. Maybe you've only got one junction, but have you got other opportunities to think about junctions? Perhaps actually the idea of a passing place as an alternative junction within a rural setting. Within role 4 there as well, we have communicating with other road users, and how we do that within a rural setting, again, is very similar to actually how you do it in an urban setting. It's that crucial eye contact, it's signalling where appropriate, it's sharing space in a more dynamic way than perhaps you actually do within an urban setting, because you have to factor in sharing with a farm vehicle, sharing with a horse and a rider perhaps. You also have cooperating with other road users. Again, great example of that would be the negotiation of a passing place. And the minimizing your risk while cycling, again, that applies to any riding environment. If we go on to the next slide there, thanks, Chris. So as Andrew covered there, we have our 4 core functions and the addition of control there, making up our nice acronym COPS. The example Andrew is giving is there with some fantastic videos which really bring it to life. But how does that actually apply to the rural setting? Well, the important thing to remember is that core functions relate to all riding. It's not just a matter of having your classic bikeability urban setting junction. So your control within a rural setting, perhaps you have a road that isn't the best quality, so control of the bike is actually really important. Maybe it isn't actually your classic riding along in a reasonably straight line. You're having to actually negotiate through potholes and around road surfaces, but doing it with control. The observation. You're constantly looking around within that rural setting as you would be in an urban setting, but the environment might change more quickly, particularly if you're on a road that's the national speed limit. That might be the road that you have to use for your bikeability training. Position within the road. Again, within single track riding, your road positioning, your default position will be a primary road position, something assertive, giving you time to see up the road, giving you time to look back down the road, and for traffic to see you earlier within their driving so they can respond to you appropriately. Priorities. That's really easily covered within discussions around sharing space on narrow roads, passing places and unofficial passing places. Who gets to go first within that, and how do you navigate that space? And finally, the S, signalling and communication, that crucial thing of making eye contact with other drivers and communicating your intentions. Within a rural setting, that might be the importance of letting the driver behind you, you're letting them know that they're there, that you know they're there by looking back, communicating with them, and continuing to cycle on until an appropriate place to pull in to let them past. So hopefully that shows you that the rural setting still has a lot of excellent bikeability learning opportunities. What we have done within the new resources is update them to have a much more rural slant. So there are some excellent resources in there that you can utilise, both in the rider's guide, so that the children themselves can have that brought to life for them. And that's equally applicable to children who perhaps live in the urban setting. Maybe they're going to be going out into a rural setting to ride with family and friends at the weekend. So they need to know this stuff too. And also within the instructor manual, there's some really excellent detailed resources within there that you should hopefully be able to have a look through and see how you can bring your rural bikeability session to life. Thank you, Chris. Excellent. So the future, there's potential for a future rural focused webinar where we'll look to cover things around your session flexibility, how you make the content realistic to the environment that you're in, and crucially to the environment that the riders are going to be riding in. If the riders live very rurally, is it important to cover the classic urban things for them? Actually, if their riding is going to be in the rural setting, it has to be within that realistic setting for them. Theory sessions, the importance of how you can utilise those in your sessions in a rural setting if there are certain things you want to cover but can't. And also how you reflect the outcomes that you've achieved with your children in the new certificates within the rural setting as well. And would hope to cover that in a future webinar.
Thanks, Josh. It's great. I mean, I guess we've included rural as a kind of really stark example of how the new resources can support that dynamic learning environment. I mean, if you go back a few years, I remember looking at static risk assessments, and one of the things we had to go and kind of look for with our junctions was, did they actually have clear line marking painted on them as well? There was also the challenges of potentially you found a junction where suddenly, you know, there might be a car parked partly in the pavement or so on, and that was going to impact upon the training session. The reality is our roads are dynamic, they change all the time. And this has been fed through the quality assurance, but also we saw with other partners in the nations across the UK, which led to the national standards. And so what we want to make sure is that the training we offer does support those life skills. I mean, we're going to deliver training in a risk-assessed environment. Some of the children will be more confident and more ready to actually make those independent trips earlier than others. But the knowledge and practical training we can provide at this stage is the foundation of a life skill. Here we've got a clear 6 to 8 hours of level 2 training, which will support ongoing road safety education for the next decade and beyond. So yeah, I mean, the rural environment hopefully just gives us a little bit of a taster on how we're trying to ensure that the training we're offering children does go beyond just those training sessions. I appreciate there's a lot to take in, and this webinar is purely meant to be an introduction. So now I would like to hand across to my colleague Nina Saunders, and she's just going to talk us through what further orientation and training we're going to make available for everyone so that we all feel confident making that shift, not just with the new resources, but also how it's going to impact those training sessions. So over to you, Nina. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about instructor orientation and training for the future. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've been really busy this year developing the new resources and the instructor training courses associated with delivering Bikeability Scotland training. The new resources were developed in line with the new national standards, with input from a working group comprised of tutors, local authority coordinators, and they were reviewed at a tutors CPD session earlier this year. And finally, you were all invited to give feedback during our consultation process, and your input was invaluable. In late 2020 and throughout 2021, we will have a range of CPD opportunities for existing instructors. None of these are mandatory because we believe that if we have experienced instructors, they will be able to deliver Bikeability Scotland training simply by reading and following the new resources. However, we do recommend that some form of CPD is undertaken if people really don't feel confident in delivering the new style of training, and there will be a number of forms of CPD and also mentoring available to support instructors to do this. This webinar indeed forms part of the CPD that we have available, so thank you very much for joining. So for existing Cycling Scotland tutors, we're providing a virtual CPD session next month. Many of our tutors have already been involved in the development of the resources and the instructor training courses, so they're already quite familiar with what we're doing. For our current CT Plus instructors, we'll be holding a virtual CPD session for them next month as well, and I'll be sending out information about this next week. This session will focus on the delivery of the new Bikeability Scotland instructor course. And any existing CT Plus instructors that are fully signed off will be able to deliver this new course, and their qualification will be transferred automatically in December. CT Plus instructors will get a name change. They will be called Bikeability Scotland Instructor Trainers, or BSITs. They will have access to all the teaching notes, resources and materials that they need to deliver the new Bikeability Scotland instructor course from mid-December. Again, more information will be communicated to the CT Plus instructors next week. In addition to this, any BSIT will have the opportunity to shadow a tutor delivering a course if they want this opportunity prior to delivering a BSI course independently. And all of our BSITs should expect to receive a QA visit in 2021 and 2022. For cycle trainers and cycle training assistants, we plan on holding additional webinars over the next few months, so keep your eye out for information in future Bikeability Scotland newsletters. And finally, for any of our existing instructors, we have practical CPD module available. This can be booked by registering your interest with your local authority coordinator. Our cycle tutors will be delivering this 3-hour module in your local area upon request, and it will be available from the beginning of January 2021. A minimum of 4 people will be needed to deliver this course, as it involves lots of group work and practical sessions, so you can put the resources into real life. So for new instructors, there will be the Bikeability Scotland instructor course, the BSI course. This replaces the CTA course. It comprises of 7 hours of contact time and 3 hours of self-supported learning. It remains an SCQF accredited course, and candidates will be able to deliver Bikeability Scotland training levels 1 and 2 upon passing this course. The CT course has also been reviewed and updated in line with the new national standards, and this course will be delivered from January 2021. It's still a 4-day course, and we are working on gaining SCQF accreditation for this as well, with the ETA for this being spring 2021. For any additional instructors who are interested in becoming a Bikeability Scotland instructor trainer, the BSIT, we are still developing this course, and this will be ready in spring 2021. I want to highlight that our priority is to provide support to our existing network of CT Plus instructors to enable them to deliver the new BSI course with clarity and confidence, especially during the first 6 months of 2021. Can I have the next slide, please? So this slide gives an overview of the new Bikeability Scotland instructor course, the BSI course. You can see it is very similar in format to the CTA course. There are still 3 hours of self-supported learning. However, the question paper will be completed post-course and will be completed online. This, of course, frees up about half an hour of time during the day to focus on more practical stuff. The focus of the course changes slightly. There's less time spent on developing and teaching level 1 skills, and there's more emphasis on moving groups, developing personal level 2 riding skills, teaching level 2 outcomes, and teaching as a team of instructors. These changes have been made in response to the national standard changes, quality assurance visits, and feedback from Cycling Scotland tutors about delivery. It was piloted back in February in Dumfries and Galloway with good feedback from candidates and tutors. More information about the BSI course and its delivery will be given at the Tutor and CT Plus webinars in December. Next slide, please. The new resources highlight information about inclusive cycle training. As Chris mentioned earlier, this is something that is key to delivery of Bikeability Scotland training. You'll find in the following 2 slides, there's a little bit of information about inclusive delivery. And these 2 slides are taken from the Level 1 instructor notes, and more information will be found in the Bikeability Scotland instructor manual. So the emphasis on delivering Bikeability Scotland training is that it is rider-led training. So thinking about every single rider in your group as an individual, what are their needs, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. As this slide suggests, communication prior to starting Bikeability Scotland training is important. The ability to be flexible and creative in your approach is also important, and considering using additional instructors to give the riders that you're teaching the support they need by improving the ratio of instructors to riders. Indeed, some riders may need one-to-one support to complete Bikeability Scotland training, and I've seen this done previously in visits to schools, and it works really well. You may also need to think about using a different type of cycle to complete the training, and all of these things can be discussed with the child, their parent, carer, teacher, and school. If I can have the next slide, please. So this slide is also from the Level 1 instructor notes. It's for Activity 2, check your bike is ready for a journey. You will see there are some tips provided to support inclusive delivery. We've also provided learn to ride information in the Level 1 instructor notes. This means that instructors can provide additional support to non-riders prior to Bikeability Scotland training starting, so they can be included in the training when your formal sessions do start. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that inclusive cycle training is a huge subject and cannot be covered quickly and easily. We do have a practical one-day CPD module that covers inclusive cycle training in more detail, and if you're interested in this, please contact your local authority coordinator to register your interest. So to summarise, inclusive cycle training must be tailored to the individual, it must be rider-led, so talk to the rider, the parent or carer, the school and their teacher. Training must accommodate riders not only with additional support needs, but also with different abilities and different levels of confidence. You may need to think about different ways to complete activities and achieve outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. There we go. Sure. So, I mean, again, another introduction. We obviously have got some further CPD training available on that and can support wider training directly on that subject. But I guess what we're hoping to say is the resources do have some more tips and guidance on it. Just as a reminder, we've got up here the kind of current guidelines around about delivery. I think, you know, we're all trying to navigate ourselves through the different tiers in relation to public health guidelines right now. At the moment, we do seem to be in a fortunate position at providing the local authority procedures are in place and supportive, but bikeability training in terms of supporting outdoor education to young people under 18 can continue at the moment across all tiers. And we still have the webinar is available for view from last month, looking at some of the lessons we learned from the childcare hubs during the peak spring lockdown. But yeah. You can take a look at bikeability.scot. We've got an overview of our current guidelines. Just as a reminder, we are recording this session today as well, and it will be available to view later. So if there's anything you wanted to go over again, or you wanted to point some of your colleagues to, the link will come out very soon. So I'm going to just move us on then to questions and answers. I'll stop sharing my screen because I think that way we can focus on actually what's come through. I see we've got quite a few questions coming up just now. So I'll take them as they are. So thanks everyone who's contributed. We'll try and get through as many as possible, but I'm conscious of time. We'll be looking to try and wrap up by 11:30. First questions come in from Colin Smith, and has also had some, it's been bumped up. How receptive have education been regarding training out with 30-mile-an-hour areas? And have you changed risk assessments to reflect national speed limits and ratios, etc.? So, I mean, in response to this, Colin, we do actually have some parts of Scotland where training does take place outside the speed limits we would associate with an urban environment. I was actually surprised in one of the island authorities that even some of the town communities at present had a 40-mile-an-hour rather than a 30-mile-an-hour limit. As always, so what we need to do is take account of the local conditions. So on many of those roads, even if there was a national speed limit, it wouldn't be appropriate to drive at that rate. In some of those roads, it just happens to be through the sheer legalities of it. That's how those roads are set up. I guess the main message from us, though, is training must always be responsive to local conditions and what's available, and also the abilities of the group we're taking out. Quite clearly, it would be, where the speed is significantly higher than 30 miles an hour, we need to look at it very carefully, because it's unlikely to be a suitable environment for taking out a Bikeability Scotland Level 2 audience and group. The question on ratios, though, I just want to pick on that because it's one we're asked time and time again. It's probably worth me noting that in Scotland, the Bikeability Scotland Delivery Group, the sort of governance group which involves various partners, took a decision a number of years ago that while the national standard recommended a ratio of 1:6, in Scotland, to facilitate delivery, the sort of 1:8 or 2:16 guide would remain here. That is what we would recommend as a maximum ratio, and it's a very blunt instrument in terms of looking at what a ratio should be. You may actually have a group of children who need a quite different ratio. Your road environment may look different. Again, we would always encourage to look at your risk assessment, to look at what's appropriate and tailored for the needs. But yeah, in terms of a short answer to that, Colin, sorry, that's a very lengthy one I've provided. But yes, we do actually have some areas right now where the nearest training environment has been risk assessed, but would fall outside of a 30-mile-an-hour area. Sorry, I should just add, I'm being prompted by David in the background. We've actually got a poll happening as well. He'll bring it on screen just now. And it's just a chance to feedback on how confident you would feel on some of the CPD. Great, hopefully you can see that. And there's a chance to respond to that while we go through some more questions. Peter Clinch has asked us, the main junction in a rural location might be a driveway entrance, but they work much the same as roads. Absolutely. I mean, this goes back to some of our experience in supporting some rural environments again. And I think what we hope is that the way bikeability training will progress is, I mean, ideally it is based around a standard set of junctions that we're all known and familiar with, but it shouldn't be limited to that. The core functions we're trying to develop have to be supportive of children in the environment where they're likely to ride as well. If I can move on to the next question. Well, it's a comment from Fiona White, who said, be really interested in a rural focus webinar. Absolutely, I think there's so much more we can learn, and we would like to facilitate that shared learning as well. Also, in terms of what kind of guidance, I appreciate local authorities in particular and look to Cycling Scotland for clear-cut black and white answers. They're not always possible to provide, as you'll see from me giving some rambling responses right now. But yeah, I mean, I think out of these ones, we would be able to help you interpret how the national standards and the training is set up to support your training environment. The big thing I have to keep looking back in is we do see cycle training as a life skill. And even if some of the children participating right now might not live in an environment where the road conditions or local infrastructure do support many kind of local journeys, that is going to change as they move throughout their life and education. And we want to provide as much meaningful knowledge and confidence that they'll retain, so that as they do progress, that stays with them. I'm going to go to Tom Oxtoby's question next, which is, will Bikeability Scotland instructor courses be able to run in rural settings without a marked T-junction? And if I could just call in Nina, would you like to provide an answer to that one?
Yeah, it's hard to say because it will depend on what is available at each location. So if the Bikeability Scotland instructor outcomes can be achieved at that particular location, then yes. But I can't say that it will be able to be achieved at every rural setting or in every rural location. It might be that the people who want to attend the Bikeability Scotland instructor course may need to travel a little way into a slightly busier location where there are more appropriate places to deliver the training. So we would have to check each location before we could say that it could be delivered there or not.
Thanks, Nina. I'll just pick up on something slightly more general in that as well. The cycle training assistant course, as it's been known for these years, but will become the Bikeability Scotland instructor, has always had this word assistant attached to it, which may have seemed slightly strange, because if you are a cycle training assistant, chances are you weren't the person actually leading that training as well. The reason it was called assistant at the beginning was because it was assumed, compared to the cycle trainer, we never went into as much detail about operating procedures or static risk assessments. There was always the kind of idea that there would be someone else there to support and set those up. And I know that varies a bit from local authority to local authority. Very often someone who understands and has transferable experience but really knows the local community would be able to identify the best training venue. If you are unsure on the training venues you're looking at, no, we can put you in touch with a more experienced either cycle trainer or mentor or local authority staff member who can help you make a reasoned decision on locations. But yeah, the assistant bit, whilst we recognised, did refer to those static procedures rather than who was leading training. Okay, I'm going to look through the next questions here. They're coming in fast. Tim's asked, will instructor-pupil ratios be changing? Will it remain 1:8 in Scotland when England and Wales are 1:6, and why not standard? Okay, Tim, I'll try and give you the simple answer to this one. Road safety education remains a devolved function. Within Scotland, when this was last looked at quite recently, we have input from local authority coordinators. We have input from a range of stakeholders, including Education Scotland and Road Safety Scotland. Whilst the 1:6 ratio sounds fantastic, and I guess we would always generally prefer to work with a smaller ratio, the decision was made on what was safe and what was actually deliverable, and what was going to address teaching capacity concerns as well. We want as many children to benefit as possible from a training session, and the feedback we got very strongly was that 1:8 would help actually enable this opportunity to reach a far wider audience. As I do say, that is kind of put forward as a maximum ratio, and you should really look at the group you're working with as well. They may have particular requirements where you would want to reduce that ratio. You may also be in a situation where the layout and the training you're offering would suit a smaller ratio as well. So yeah, in many ways, obviously, I think most people would prefer to work with a smaller number. I think we also need to recognise we have a commitment that we want every single child in Scotland to benefit from national standard cycle training, and a 1:8 ratio is very much seen by our partners and our trainers as a way to help enable that. Okay. MT, I've heard that the flapping hand sign when stopping at the side of the road has been removed. Is that right? And I'm going to pass that one across to Nina, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chris, much appreciated. So the flappy arm signal that you refer to, which is often called the stopping or slowing down signal, still exists in the highway code. The reason why we haven't included this or highlighted this in the resources is because if a child has their arm or hand off of the handlebars to complete this signal, it means that they're not fully in control of their bikes necessarily. So is it better that the child has control of the bike, perhaps does a left hand signal if needed and pulls in? If there's no traffic around that needs to be communicated to, or pedestrians or other bike riders, then no signal is needed. As Andrew highlighted earlier in some of his videos, you only need to communicate to road users if necessary. However, there is still mention of the stopping signal in the resources, and if you want to choose to teach that to children, you're very welcome. However, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of other road users, pedestrians, drivers and riders actually don't know what that signal means. So just bearing all these things in mind means that you can make a decision about what you want to teach the children.
Thanks, Dina. I should add that, I mean, we shared a lot of the consultation responses as we got them with everyone going through the process, because there are a few issues like the slowing down signal as prescribed in the highway code, whereas a variety of views and people have strong opinions on either side. I think my response would be, when you look at the communication signalling sections of the resources we put out, we would also recognise that beyond the arm signals, there are other effective ways you can communicate depending on the situation. I think it is absolutely fair that as an instructor you could still ensure your trainees understand what that signal is, but also if we're trying to get them to think dynamically and apply to different situations, potentially if we're on a shared use path, if we're on a road network when there's a lot of other interaction and controls important, we need to think what other communication mechanisms are there. So it's not been removed completely, but it's also, we've got less emphasis that it's a default mechanism of what must be taught. I've had another one here, which is about, are there any videos on multi-roundabouts with cycle lanes? Which I'll just pick up on. At the moment, we have been through the process of updating the level 1 and level 2 materials. We haven't yet kicked off the full level 3 approach. There's obviously a lot of conversation that's been happening in the background before we go, but we felt so much of the look and format of a new level 3 will depend on what we approved at level 1 and 2. So multi-lane roundabouts with cycle lanes, we're starting to get outside the level 2 format right now. So I think that is something we would certainly look at in future when developing further resources. But right now, the materials we are putting out are very much focused on those level 1 and 2 environments. Okay, here's another question on naming. Do we start to use the new Bikeability Scotland instructor title when setting up training? Nina?
Hi there. Yeah, that's a good question. At the moment, until the end of December, no, use the CTA course. Once you've had access to the webinar and information after December, the course will be available for you to set up as a BSI course. So from mid-December, that will be available for you to set up. If you are setting up courses for next year currently, please set them up as a CTA course, and we can then transfer the course title to the BSI course for you.
Thanks, Nina. We're kind of running out of time now for the webinar, so there are some questions here I don't think we're going to be able to reach today. One of them, for example, on numbers for lead rides in children due to COVID-19. I think that would really just direct you to all the guidance which is coming out from Scottish Government right now in relation to different activities. But for anything when it comes to ratios, I'm afraid Cycling Scotland is likely to step back from offering a definitive guidance on what's an appropriate ratio. I mean, I think we would always look at our generic standard maximum as a region of 1 to 8. We would always encourage you to operate in a 2 to 16. But depending on the route planning you do for the lead ride, probably need to make a more informed local decision based on that. And if you want some support, or be put in touch with one of our tutors to help sorting it out, do get in touch and we'll support that. David, can I ask, do we have the results of the poll we put round earlier? Excellent, okay. So I mean, that's an interesting mix. Certainly the webinar format is something we're going to have to continue with over the coming months. It'd be brilliant if we can get back to a stage where we can actually put on some of the successful bikeability instructor training days that we've run in the past and what was delayed from our Stirling meet last year. But I think as we do actually start to embrace the technology and get used to it, we do have the opportunity to carry on running webinars. There's a couple we've highlighted we would like to look at already in terms of rural training, something slightly more in inclusive training as well. If there are other subjects you think you would really like covered, do get in touch. I'm also pleased to see that some people feel that they are ready to go with their training as well. And as I say, the resources, they are now available. They're going through the print run just now. Our kind of expected date for when they would start to be introduced is the 1st of January. You don't have to jump upon them then if you're more comfortable or want to wait till further training. But if you are confident, it'd be great to get your feedback on how you found them while you've been putting them out now. In terms of rounding up, just to repeat again, we have recorded this session, so it should be available relatively soon. I'd like to thank everyone who's been on the panel and the presentations today. But most importantly, I'd like to thank everyone who's actually taken some more time out to engage with this webinar. And yeah, I'd like to say good luck with the remaining cycle training if you're delivering before the Christmas break. Thank you all again for the knowledge you've imparted. And I should also really thank everyone. I mean, the resources which have been put out there and have been for approval, they've been through an extensive amount of feedback, and hopefully you'll have seen through the feedback we've given how much of that we've been able to take on, how we recognise so much of it has actually greatly improved what was initially put out in the first round of consultation. And yeah, really do appreciate that ongoing communication. So I'd like to leave it there. Thanks everyone for your time. And if there's anything we've not covered that you do want an answer, if you get in touch with us at info@bikeability.scot, we can pick it up there. All the best.